Get out of my way, you fool. You're going to ruin my imported silk. Sebastian Thorne delivered a sharp shove at the shopping cart, sending it crashing into Nancy. She collapsed to her knees in the supermarket aisle, her hands instinctively shielding her 8-month belly. Sebastian's friends laughed, recording the scene on their phones. Nancy looked up, serene and tearless. She stared directly at Sebastian. "My husband is coming." The phrase fell like a silent bomb. Something in her absolute calmness made Sebastian feel a prickle of unease for the first time. Dozens of shoppers watched from a distance. Some murmured in disgust, while others discreetly pulled out their phones, sensing a viral gold mine. Nancy stood up with a dignity that contrasted brutally with the situation, gathered her groceries, and walked away. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel for stories that heal, inspire, and make you believe in justice again. 3 hours later, the video was trending globally. The Thorne family had spent 40 years building Thorne Global, a real estate empire worth $200 million. Eric Thorne, Sebastian's father, controlled the city's skyline, but his son had never worked a day in his life. Sebastian saw employees and shoppers as disposable objects, unaware that Nancy was a woman of quiet strength who had faced every hardship without losing her kindness. The sun hadn't even risen when Eric's phone began ringing incessantly. Through his penthouse windows, he watched the city he helped build, but on the television, his son was the face of a national scandal. "My God," Eric whispered, watching his company's stock plummet 30% in hours. Sebastian walked in, yawning. "Dad, she was just an annoying shopper. People will forget." Eric roared, "You've destroyed 40 years of work in one night." By noon, Thorne Global was hemorrhaging partners. Eric stood in his office, tie loosened, watching the board members file out one by one. Margaret Chen, his oldest business associate, paused at the door. "Eric, I've stood by you for 20 years, but I have grandchildren. I can't be associated with a company that produces monsters." The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the empty boardroom. Sebastian lounged on the penthouse sofa, scrolling through social media with detached amusement. The hashtag #ThorneTyrant was trending worldwide, but he couldn't grasp the gravity. "It's just internet noise, Dad. Tomorrow there'll be another scandal." Eric's hand trembled as he poured himself a drink. "Our stock is down 52%. We've lost 3 major contracts. The mayor's office just canceled our rezoning permit for the waterfront project. That's $30 million gone." The phone rang again. Eric answered, his face draining of color. "Yes, I understand. No, please." The line went dead. He turned to Sebastian, and for the first time in his life, the young man saw genuine fear in his father's eyes. "That was our primary lender. They're calling in our loans. All of them. We have 72 hours. Sebastian finally sat up. "What does that mean?" Eric's voice cracked. "It means we're about to lose everything I spent my entire life building because you couldn't show basic human decency to a pregnant woman in a grocery store." The next morning, a black Mercedes pulled up to the Thorne building. Out stepped attorney Thaddeus Graves, a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. He carried a single leather briefcase and wore an expression of calculated neutrality. Eric met him in the conference room. Sebastian reluctantly dragged along. "Gentlemen," Graves began, placing a thick document on the table, "my client has authorized me to present an alternative to the civil lawsuit we've prepared." Sebastian leaned forward. "Lawsuit? For what? I barely touched her." Graves' eyes were cold steel. Assault, endangerment of a pregnant woman, emotional distress. We have 17 eyewitness testimonies and 4 HD video angles. Conservative estimate of damages, $120 million. Eric's face went ashen. We don't have that kind of liquidity right now. Graves nodded slowly. I'm aware, which is why my client has proposed something unusual, a form of transformative justice, if you will. He slid a second document across the polished wood. Sebastian Thorne will serve as a manual laborer in the maternity ward of County General Hospital. He will work there under supervision until my client's baby is born. He will clean, assist nurses, transport supplies, and perform whatever tasks are required of him. Sebastian laughed incredulously. You're joking. I'm not some janitor. Graves' expression didn't change. The alternative is bankruptcy, Mr. Thorne. Your family will lose everything. Your father will lose his company, his home, his legacy. You'll both be financially ruined for the rest of your lives. This offer expires in 24 hours. If you can't stand people who treat working-class individuals like disposable objects, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Type, "Nobody deserves that." Because what happened next only got worse. Eric stared at the contract, his hand shaking. Who was your client? Graves gathered his papers. That information will be revealed when appropriate. Do we have an agreement? The silence stretched like pulled wire. Finally, Eric looked at his son. You're going to do this. You're going to do exactly what they say. Because if you don't, we lose everything, and it will be entirely your fault. County General Hospital's maternity ward smelled of disinfectant and new life. Sebastian arrived in designer jeans and a polo shirt, looking wildly out of place among the scrubs and practical uniforms. Matron Hilda, a woman built like a fortress with eyes that missed nothing, stood with her arms crossed. You must be our special volunteer, she said, the word volunteer dripping with irony. I don't care who your father is. I don't care about your money. In this ward, you follow my orders or you answer to Attorney Graves. Understood? Sebastian nodded mutely, suddenly aware that his usual arsenal of privilege had no power here. Hilda handed him a mop and bucket. Third-floor bathrooms. They haven't been cleaned since yesterday's shift change. You'll find everything you need in the supply closet. Sebastian stared at the mop as if it were a foreign artifact. I don't know how to... Hilda's eyebrow arched. Then I suggest you learn quickly. Women are giving birth in this hospital. They deserve clean facilities. Get to work. The bathrooms were worse than he'd imagined. Sebastian gagged, stumbled, and nearly quit a dozen times in the first hour. His hands, which had never held anything heavier than a champagne glass, blistered and ached. His designer shoes were ruined within 30 minutes. But every time he thought about walking out, he remembered his father's hollow eyes and the specter of absolute financial ruin. By the end of the first day, Sebastian could barely stand. He stumbled to the staff locker room, slumped against the wall, and stared at his raw, reddened hands. A nurse passing by glanced at him with casual indifference, offering neither pity nor cruelty. Just the same neutral professionalism she'd show any hospital worker. For the first time in his life, Sebastian Thorne was invisible. He was nobody special. He was just another set of hands doing necessary work. 2 weeks into his service, Sebastian was moving linens through the third-floor corridor when he saw her. Nancy, walking slowly with one hand supporting her back, paused at the nurse's station for her prenatal checkup. Their eyes met across the hallway. Sebastian froze, a stack of clean sheets in his arms, unable to look away. Nancy's expression was unreadable, not triumphant, not angry, just observing. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying a puzzle, then continued to the examination room. Sebastian stood there long after she'd disappeared, his heart pounding in a way it never had before. Guilt. He was feeling guilt. The sensation was so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. That night, lying in his stripped-down apartment, his father had sold the penthouse to cover immediate debts. Sebastian couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Nancy's face. Not the moment she fell in the supermarket, though that haunted him too, but her expression in the hospital hallway. She hadn't looked at him with hatred. She'd looked at him with something far more devastating. Quiet disappointment, as if she'd expected better from another human being and been proven wrong. The next morning, Sebastian worked with a different energy. He cleaned faster, more thoroughly. He volunteered for the hardest tasks. When matron Hilda asked him to transport a new mother in a wheelchair to the recovery ward, he did so with careful gentleness, remembering how carelessly he'd shoved Nancy's cart. The woman thanked him softly, and the simple words hit him harder than any insult ever had.
3 weeks into his sentence, Sebastian's hands were a disaster, cracked, bleeding, covered in a patchwork of bandages. He tried to hide them, working through the pain, but everything he touched left small spots of blood. He was emptying a trash bin when he found a small paper bag on top of his locker. Inside was a jar of medical-grade healing cream and a note in careful handwriting. "For your hands, they heal better when cared for. N." Sebastian stared at the jar for a full minute, unable to process the gesture. Nancy had left this. The woman he'd humiliated, whose unborn child he'd endangered, had noticed his suffering and responded with kindness. He sat down heavily, the cream clutched in his blistered hands, and something broke inside his chest. Not dramatically, not with sobs, but with a quiet cracking sound that only he could hear. He applied the cream that night, and the relief was immediate. But more than the physical comfort, something else settled in his bones. Shame. Deep, genuine shame that had nothing to do with being caught or punished. He was ashamed of who he'd been, of the casual cruelty he'd considered normal, of the complete disregard he'd shown for another person's humanity. If you believe kindness has more power than cruelty, hit that subscribe button. People like Sebastian's old self won't, and you need to hear what he discovered next. The next day, Sebastian saw a teenage girl in the waiting area, crying quietly. She was alone, very pregnant, and clutching a hospital bill with shaking hands. He overheard her conversation with the billing clerk. "I don't have this kind of money. I don't have anyone. Please, I need help." The clerk's face was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, honey. Without payment arrangements, we can't schedule your delivery." Sebastian walked to the administrator's office during his lunch break. "How much does she need?" The administrator looked up, surprised. "Mr. Thorne, you're not supposed to—" Sebastian cut him off. "How much?" The number was significant. Sebastian called his father. "Dad, I need you to pay for something. It's important." Eric's tired voice came through the line. "Sebastian, we're barely holding on. What is this about?" Sebastian explained. There was a long silence. Finally, Eric said, "Okay, give them my card information. But Sebastian, I'm proud of you." The words were simple, but they were the first time Eric had said them with genuine meaning.
That evening, Attorney Graves requested a meeting with Eric Thorne alone. They met in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria. Graves slid a photograph across the table. "Mr. Thorne, do you recognize this man?" Eric stared at the photograph of a military officer in dress uniform, medals glinting on his chest. His hands began to shake. "Elias, my brother, But he's been missing for 12 years. The military said he was lost in action. Graves nodded slowly. Commander Elias Thorne returned from covert operations 3 years ago. He's been living quietly, trying to reconnect with the family he left behind. He wanted to see if the Thorne name still meant something worth saving. Eric's voice was barely a whisper. Nancy is married to Elias? Graves confirmed with a single nod. Your brother orchestrated this entire situation, Mr. Thorne, not out of vengeance, but as a test. He wanted to know if any goodness remained in the Thorne bloodline, or if the family he remembered had been completely consumed by wealth and arrogance. Eric felt tears burning behind his eyes. My son nearly killed his wife, his pregnant wife. Graves stood. Yes, and now your son is learning what it means to serve, to work, to understand the value of every person he once dismissed. Commander Thorne is watching. He's been watching since day one. And what happens next depends entirely on what Sebastian chooses to become.
Sebastian was restocking the nursery when the emergency call came through. Code Blue, Delivery Room 3. Preeclampsia, emergency C-section. Nurses rushed past him. He heard a name that made his blood freeze. Nancy Thorne. He shouldn't have been in the delivery wing, but his feet moved before his mind could stop them. Through the observation window, Sebastian watched the controlled chaos. Nancy lay on the table, her face pale but composed, even as monitors beeped urgently and surgical teams moved with practiced efficiency. Standing beside her, holding her hand with infinite gentleness, was a man in civilian clothes with the bearing of a soldier. Commander Elias Thorne, Sebastian's uncle, the man whose wife he'd assaulted. The surgery lasted 47 minutes. Sebastian stood frozen at the window the entire time, watching the doctors work, watching Elias whisper encouragement to his wife, watching the miracle of medical science save 2 lives that were in critical danger. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, sharp and indignant and gloriously alive, Sebastian felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. Matron Hilda found him there an hour later, still standing at the window, watching as Nancy held her newborn son while Elias kissed her forehead with reverent gratitude. "That's your family," Hilda said softly. It wasn't a question. Sebastian nodded, unable to speak. "Then maybe it's time you met them properly." Sebastian stood outside Nancy's recovery room before he found the courage to knock. Elias opened the door, and Sebastian found himself face to face with a man who radiated quiet strength. "Uncle Elias," Sebastian said, his voice cracking, "I didn't know you were alive." Elias studied him with eyes that had seen war and loss and survival. "I needed to know who you'd become, Sebastian. I needed to know if my family was worth coming home to." He stepped aside. "Nancy wants to see you." Nancy sat propped against pillows, exhausted but alert, the baby sleeping in a bassinet beside her. Sebastian approached as if walking on glass. "Mrs. Thorne, Nancy, I'm so sorry. I'm so profoundly sorry. There's no excuse for what I did, no explanation that makes it acceptable. I was cruel and careless, and I nearly—" His voice broke. "I nearly killed you both." Nancy looked at him with those same calm eyes. "Do you know what I saw in the supermarket that day, Sebastian? I saw a young man who'd never been taught the value of another human life. I saw someone who'd been given everything except the one thing that matters: empathy." She gestured to the chair beside her bed. "Sit down." Sebastian sat, his hands clasped tightly. Nancy continued, My husband and I, we've seen real evil in this world. We've seen people who choose cruelty knowing exactly what they're doing. You weren't evil, Sebastian. You were ignorant, and ignorance can be cured. She reached for the baby, lifted him with careful grace, and extended him toward Sebastian. Would you like to hold your cousin? His name is Leo. Sebastian's hands trembled as he accepted the tiny, warm weight of his newborn cousin. Leo was impossibly small, impossibly perfect, with miniature fingers that curled around Sebastian's thumb with instinctive trust. Sebastian looked down at this fragile life, this person who existed because of Nancy's strength and the skill of medical professionals and the grace of chance. He thought about how close he'd come to destroying this, how his carelessness could have stolen this moment, this life, this future. Tears fell onto Leo's blanket before Sebastian realized he was crying. Not polite tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere he didn't know existed inside himself. "I'm so sorry," he gasped. "I'm so sorry." Elias placed a firm hand on Sebastian's shoulder. Nancy smiled gently, and Sebastian Thorne experienced his own rebirth, held in the weight of a newborn baby and the mercy of people who had every reason to destroy him, but chose healing instead.
5 years later, the Thorne Global building still stood downtown, but it bore a different name now: the Thorne Family Community Center. Eric had liquidated most of his assets, restructured the company into a nonprofit, and redirected the family's remaining wealth towards building affordable housing and funding medical clinics in underserved neighborhoods. Sebastian Thorne worked at County General Hospital as a certified neonatal nurse. He specialized in caring for premature infants and supporting teenage mothers who had nowhere else to turn. The other staff knew his story. Everyone did. The video was still out there on the internet, a permanent record of who he'd been. But they also knew who he'd become. On Leo's 5th birthday, the Thorne family gathered in a small backyard. Eric and Sebastian, Elias and Nancy, little Leo running circles around them with the boundless energy of childhood. Eric grilled burgers, while Nancy laughed at something Eric said. Sebastian sat on the grass, letting Leo climb on his back like a jungle gym. "Uncle Bash, tell me again about when you met my mom," Leo demanded. Sebastian exchanged glances with Nancy, who nodded permission. "Well, buddy, I wasn't a very good person when I met your mom. I was mean to her when I should have been kind. But she taught me something important." Leo looked up with wide eyes. "What?" Sebastian ruffled his hair. "She taught me that every person matters, that being rich or poor, important or ordinary, none of that determines your value. Your value comes from how you treat others, especially when they can't do anything for you." Processing this with the seriousness of a child grappling with big concepts. "Are you good now?" Sebastian smiled. "I'm trying to be, every single day. Your mom gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one, so now I try to give second chances to other people." Leo seemed satisfied with this answer and resumed his game, declaring himself an airplane and zooming across the lawn. Nancy sat down beside Sebastian. "He asks about you constantly. He's your favorite person." Sebastian felt the familiar sting of grateful tears. "I don't deserve that." Nancy shook her head. "You do now. You've earned it. That's what transformation means, Sebastian."
Not erasing the past, but building a future that makes amends for it. If you watched or listened up to this point, comment the country you're watching this from. Represent your country. As the sun set over the modest backyard, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Sebastian Thorne watched his family, because that's what they were now, truly family, and felt something he'd never experienced in his old life of luxury and excess: peace. Not the absence of struggle, because every day was still hard work, but the peace that comes from knowing your life has purpose beyond yourself. The viral video was still out there, a digital ghost of his worst moment, but now it was balanced by thousands of hours of service, by babies he'd helped bring safely into the world, by families he'd supported through their darkest moments. The internet never forgot, but it also documented his transformation. Comments on the old video now included updates. "This is the same guy who now works at County General and literally saved my sister's premature twins. People can change." Sebastian stood, brushing grass from his scrubs. He'd come straight from a shift and joined Elias at the grill. His uncle handed him a spatula. "You look tired." Sebastian grinned. 36-hour shift, but we saved 3 preemies last night. Totally worth it." Elias clapped him on the shoulder with pride. "Your father is proud of you. I'm proud of you. But more importantly, you should be proud of yourself." In the distance, Leo's laughter rang out like bells. Nancy's smile glowed in the fading light, and Eric sat with the contentment of a man who'd lost an empire but gained something infinitely more valuable: a son he could respect. The Thorne family had fallen from the heights of wealth and power, crashed spectacularly in the full view of the world, and then done something remarkable. They'd rebuilt themselves into something better. Not perfect, never perfect, but trying, growing, healing. And in the end, that was the only legacy that truly mattered.